Welcome back. You're watching Checkpoint. Let's get you informed. Now, former President Uhuru Kenyatta recently called top media editors to explain his position amid rising political temperatures that come in the back of protests called by opposition leaders. However, during his tenure, the relationship between the state and the media was marked by both highs and lows. Our Swahili editor, Shisia Wasilwa, has been keeping tabs on the developments. This story was produced and translated by Alex Kiarie. Here is Uhuru, Media, and the Humbling Pie, voiced by Miriam Angel.
I, Uhuru Kenyatta.
His tenure began in 2013. His was a regime that was elected according to the then new constitution that was promulgated under his predecessor Mwai Kibaki in 2010. Under this man, Uhuru Kenyatta, that new constitution that was regarded as the most progressive in Africa would be largely affected.
The impression that they were a co-presidency was probably the problem. Although Ruto was always careful to say, my boss, but there was that impression.
For journalists and the media at large, it was a moment of triumph. The freedom and acceptance that they had long fought for had finally come. They would no longer beg to be recognized. The law of the land had enshrined and protected their freedom, and many were watching to see if the new regime that would later be popularly known as the Uhuru government would implement Article 34 of the Constitution, which guaranteed media its freedom. The two gentlemen, Uhuru Kenyatta, then president, and his deputy president, William Ruto, did not disappoint when they delivered their speeches just after inauguration. They promised to accord the media its respect and space. The media, indeed, had never felt true acceptance until Uhuru happened. This was cemented by a media breakfast hosted by the two at State House. That was on July 12, 2013. It was a breakfast like no other.
We were taking advantage of that opportunity to lobby for our interests as media. There has been a lot of misunderstanding that the fact that we went there meant to support the government of the day or to support President Kenyatta. There is absolutely nothing like that.
When his time to address, Uhuru Kenyatta did indicate that the event was meant to bring a new day that was filled with hope in the new beginning, in ties between the state and the media.
The problem, I think, was that his expectation and that of the people around him was that now that we have had some nice friendly chat, had a big breakfast, we will now tone down our criticism of government, stop holding them to account. And when it did not happen is now when everything turned around.
All bitter relationships often begin on a sweet note. The one between Uhuru government and the Kenyan media was not different. It was short-lived and crumbled in the aftermath of the October 2013 attack at the Westgate Mall. Journalists were chased out of parliament over the manner in which the attack was covered. Legislators termed them misleading reports. The bone of contention were reports and photos showing soldiers allegedly looting while responding to the attack. In December the same year, Parliament passed a harsh law targeting journalists who failed to uphold media ethics. The enforcement of the law was bestowed on state agencies. In other words, the state would determine, prosecute, and judge any offences committed by journalists. By 2015, the relationship between the state and the media was on a downward spiral. As the media poked holes in the political marriage between Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto, the two were so close that shirts and ties matched. Angered by the constant questions, the then president snapped.
Nataka leo muniambie ya kwamba yale ambaye tunasoma ni ya ukweli au ni ya uongo? Ni ya uongo. Kwa hivyo vile nilisema ya kwamba gazeti ni ya kufunga nyama ni sawa.
Within no time he had coined that gazeti ni ya kufunga nyama nonsense. And he was always saying he doesn't read papers, but he was always reacting to what we are writing. So I suppose he must be reading.
The gap between the president and the media deepened further on February 2018.
Sasa si nyinyi muzime hiyo mavitu yenu na muende. Kazi imekwisha.
The state would drive another nail into the coffin when it halted all advertising on local media platforms. Instead, the government launched the MyGov website, where all government advertising was redirected to. This would financially choke the media.
Government advertising is not a favor. The government needs to communicate, to reach out to citizens, to explain itself. Who else can do that job best than the Kenyan media? But in this case, this particular case, it was a negative in that it was meant to punish the media and to use government advertising spend for blackmail and intimidation.
The media's revenue was reduced by a whopping 2.8 billion shillings, which accounted for 30% of its total income. With the launch of MyGov website, the relationship between the two institutions completely went south. As the media protested the actions by the state, it was also a moment of necessity, being the moment of inventions, all for survival. Media houses turned to innovative ways of raising revenue.
Maybe it was a blessing in disguise, because it brought to us the reality that as media, we must not allow ourselves to be hostage to any one big advertiser. We must be very careful that we are not dependent on them.
Your administration comes in, they're entrenched cartels.
The 2013 presidential debate was a groundbreaking moment for Kenyan media. Private and public media houses pooled resources in a rare unity of purpose. They brought together all presidential aspirants to sell their manifesto. This gave a chance to the undecided voters to make up their minds on who to vote for. President Uhuru Kenyatta, who was then facing charges at the International Criminal Court, happily participated. But in 2017, with relations now on the rocks, Uhuru Kenyatta, who was eyeing a second term as an incumbent, refused to take part.
Alikuwa na sababu. Kwa sababu raundi ya kwanza wale ambao walikuwa naongoza huu mjadala walifanya ati kama ni maswali yote ni yeye, na wengine wako hapo wanakaa tu hivyo, wanafanya nini hapo?
Raila Odinga, who was vying for the presidency in 2022 under the Azimio la Umoja Kenya coalition, which Uhuru Kenyatta supported, would follow suit. Well, he still supports the coalition. Indeed, the irony of history lies in its ability to repeat itself. Months after Azimio la Umoja Kenya lost to President William Ruto, the shoe is on the other foot. Uhuru Kenyatta has found himself in the same corner with the media, both fighting for survival. Lately, the opposition has called for protests over several issues. They range from what they term as electoral justice to the high cost of living. In response, the state has been going hard on protesters and a section of opposition leaders. For a man who once turned to the Mount Kenya media, using it to besiege a skeptical electorate to vote for his chosen candidate, Raila Odinga, this is a form of poetic justice. The standoff between the state and the opposition has been worsening. All along, Uhuru Kenyatta has been in a restless dream, but not walking alone in his retirement. He has been speaking without talking amid accusations of sponsoring protests. His was the sound of silence. But this was broken when his son's home was recently raided.
What does this government want? Because if it wants me, the fact that I've been silent doesn't mean I'm scared. Come for me. Why do what does my mother have to do with anything? What does my children have to do with anything? Kama shida yenu ni mimi, I'm here.
In his trying moment, Uhuru Kenyatta seems to be in the naked light, a light through which he now sees his old friend, the media, with whom he now seeks to speak to once again.
Na nawashukuru. Na ombi langu kwenu nyinyi kama fourth estate. Lindeni uhuru wa Wakenya. Yeah. Lindeni demokrasia ya taifa letu. Sina ingine. Hiyo ni haki yenu.
Although his vision might have been blurred by the power he wielded while it lasted, maybe the media now has a champion who will push for its rights and freedom as enshrined in the Constitution. For the voice of the people, which a free media represents, It is indeed a voice of they who wield true power.
Uhuru learned one lesson once he was out of office, that when you are up against a government that wants to intimidate or harass you or generally oppress you, your best ally, the best places you can get an ally is in the media. It is the one which will amplify your cry. He didn't know that when he was in office because, as I said, arrogance of power. Nobody can touch him. He's untouchable. Until he comes out there and realizes that he's now an ordinary citizen, and the harassment that we all go through, he's not immune from it. And that should be a lesson for President Ruto also.
Miriam Angel, KTN News.
In the world of